All right, class. Today we're going to be continuing our reading about European exploration. Now, remember the Europeans, they at first were very scared of the idea of exploring, but they changed their mind, and one of the people that actually changed their mind about exploring the world and traveling was Marco Polo, the guy with the funny hat. Now, this guy with the funny hat, he was a great explorer before people even wanted to explore. Remember, people were scared of traveling, and most people never left the town that they grew up in. It'd be like if you never left the city of Muskegon. Now, I want to read this with you, and I want to talk about why was Marco Polo important and how did he change people's minds about exploring. So let's read the introduction here, right at the Marco Polo line, right here. Marco Polo liked to tell stories. He often told of adventures to faraway places. Europeans called these places Cathay and the Indies. Marco Polo had been to Cathay, as China was then called. He had also traveled to the Indies, the islands off the China coast. He told of meeting Kublai Khan, China's ruler, and seeing amazing things. White bears, black stones that burned, and a place where night lasted all winter and day lasted all summer. People laughed and called him Marco Millions because he told so many tales. Few Europeans had ever been to Asia, so they could not prove he was wrong. They just thought the stories he told could not be true. But many were. Now, the black stones he talked about, it's charcoal. So when you have charcoal, the first person from Europe that knew what charcoal was Marco Polo. And he also saw white bears. You got polar bears there. Now, they didn't believe him, but he was correct. Now, he also told some crazy stories that weren't true, but we'll talk about that later. Now, here's the story of Marco Polo. Marco Polo left when he was young. Back then, traveling, guys, took forever to go on his trip. And here's where he went. On the map on the right-hand side of the page, you can see his trip. The red route is his route to Cathay, or China. That's what they called China back then, because they didn't have the proper name for it. Now, if you follow the red route here, this took years and years. Most of Marco Polo's life was traveling. Then once he got there, he had to travel all the way back on the purple route. And this also took years, from 1271 to 1295. Now notice, this is at least 100 years, 200 or 300 years before most other explorers came to America. But this is an important time because he saw the world and he told people about it. And people read his stories for hundreds of years. Now, I want to read Marco Polo's section with you. Read along. Marco Polo. In 1271, Marco Polo left his home in Venice, Italy, to go to Asia with his father and uncle. Niccolo and Maffeo Polo were traders who had first heard of the riches this far-off land from fellow traders. Marco was just 17 years old when they set out. Now, I want you to read the rest of this. Read of some of the crazy stories he had, and I want you to think about how old was he when he actually got back. He was no longer 17, I can tell you that. Finish the section Marco Polo and pause your video, please. All right, class. By now, you should have finished the section on Marco Polo. I want you to think, how many years did his trip take? If you answered 24 years, you are correct. It took 24 years for him to go on this trip. Nowadays, you can make that same trip in about 12 hours on an airplane. Now, our next section we're going to read is called Trade Routes to the East. What I want you guys to do is I want you to actually finish the reading. You're going to read about trade routes that they found to the east. Now, what you're also going to read about is that eventually these trade routes are going to be closed off by a people called the Turks. And so they wanted all of these things at the top. They wanted spices, nutmeg, and pepper, and cinnamon. Literally, they didn't have any good spices to make their food taste good. So I want you to read all the way up to when something changes and they no longer can get to Asia, get to China and India across land. When that happened, they had to learn how to be better sailors, and they had to get over their fear of the water. So they had to learn what they needed to do to get to Asia by water, not by land like Marco Polo did. Now, the changes in Europe section is all about the changes that happened that made it possible for people to become great sailors and explorers in Europe. I want you to finish the entire text all the way to the end where it says Lesson 2 Review. So you need to read all the way through page 129. You're going to see this picture of this ship here. And one thing that changed a lot, you're going to read about technology that changed, stronger kings came into power, and better ships, which is another kind of technology. We don't think of an old ship like this with sails as being technology, but back then, having this triangular sail here and having this big ship called a caravel that could carry a lot of objects, this changed the way that the Europeans thought about their world, and it made them better explorers. And they were able to travel farther and faster than any other people. Now, I want you to read all the way through page 129 quietly to yourself. When you are finished, you will finish the assignment that will be posted on Google Classroom. Thank you.